The trade in all its form nets an estimated $32 billion each year. That's an estimate from the International Labour Organization and the UN. They estimate that $10 billion is derived just from the initial sale of the individuals, with the remainder of that 32 million coming from the estimated profits from the activities or the goods produced by the victims of this barbaric crime. And as Antonio has pointed out to us, and through his fantastic work at the UN knows only too well, human trafficking knows no boundaries. Almost every country in the world is affected, whether as a source or as a transit point or as a destination for victims. We were just talking earlier, Steve, weren't we, that even in America, American girls, not just poor Mexicans, though that in itself is a crime, but American girls, North American girls are being trafficked. That's in the most powerful country in the world. But you know, we can get overwhelmed by the scale of this problem. It can lead us to be numbed. It can lead us perhaps to despair that we can ever do anything about it. And that's why it's important always to listen to the tragic individual stories of the victims, to remember at the heart of these statistics lies a vulnerable human being. And that's why the stories are so important, why they demand our action and our anger. Because it's these accounts of hopes crushed, of lives ruined, which have got to shake us out of our despair. And time again, the voices we hear are female. Now that should be no surprise. Women and girls, of course, make up the overwhelming majority of victims trafficked for sex. Their destinations include cities and towns up and down the UK, in, as we've heard, Croydon, a place where actually on Monday I'll be sitting as a judge. An ordinary British town, trafficking going on there. A recent investigation by the Guardian newspaper showed the heartbreaking fate of hundreds of Chinese girls, some of them as young as 11, brought here to the UK, not somewhere in Africa, not even somewhere in Eastern Europe. No, here in our country. Those girls dreamed of a better life. What they got was a life in a brothel. Antonio's so right. What are those men doing in our communities when they go in to a so-called massage parlour and accept so-called services from a girl who can't even speak English? They should be rescuing those girls. They should be going out and alerting the authorities, not taking the benefit of the service and pretending that this is something that is a free choice made by the victim. But it's not just our country, it happens around the world. But you know, women and girls aren't only involved in the sex trade. They are also the majority, according to the International Labour Organization, of those economically exploited in other ways, in sweatshops or as domestic servants. Trafficking, like poverty, discrimination and abuse of human rights, wears a woman's face. Indeed, they're strongly related. It's the prejudice which women face in many parts of the world, the fact that they have no rights or control over their own lives, which helps create the conditions which trafficking can flourish. Women and children are the key target group of the traffickers, exactly because they're marginalized, because they're poor, because they're excluded from education and employment opportunities. And that's why we must see the urgent need to step up the efforts to combat trafficking as part of a wider battle for human rights and, of course, for women's rights. And it's also timely. For along with the recent celebration of the 200th anniversary of the ending of the transatlantic slave trade, we have, of course, another very significant anniversary coming up on the 10th of December, as Antonio mentioned. 60 years ago, the international community came together and agreed a universal declaration of human rights. It was a remarkable response to the horrors of the Holocaust and the Second World War, and signalled a determination to build a better world. It was drawn up by experts from across the world, led by a fantastic woman, the inimitable Eleanor Roosevelt. And it set out clearly the basic rights which belong to each and every one of us, whatever our background, whatever our country, simply because of our common humanity. When it was adopted on the 10th of December 1948 by the founding members of the United Nations, it was a huge step forward for the world, and it proudly proclaimed in Article 4 that no one shall be held in slavery or servitude, and slavery and the slave shall be prohibited in all their forms. But just as Wilberforce would be shocked to see the size of the modern-day slave trade, so the authors of that Universal Declaration would, I believe, be appalled that their ambitions are so far from realization. Across the world, there are tens of millions living in fear and hunger and denied the most basic of rights. And of course, men and women both suffer from these denials of rights. But the fact is, women are particularly badly affected. 70% of the world's poor are female, according to the UN. 2 out of 3 illiterate adults are women. Less than 2% of the titled land in the developing world is owned by women. 500,000 women a year die unnecessarily as a result of pregnancy or childbirth. This discrimination which women suffer follows them from cradle to grave. You see it in cultures which encourage families to value boys, but which lead to abortions or even infanticide of baby girls. We see it in those societies which limit educational opportunities for girls, forcing them to remain trapped inside the home instead of preparing them for a life outside the home. We see it too in the child brides, in forced marriages, and in the many societies which turn a blind eye to domestic violence. And it exists as well in the plight of widows in India and other countries who are pushed to the very fringes of society, denied the rights to inherit their husband's assets. The gender gap varies from place to place, but the overall pattern remains clear, and women across the world know it.